If you're an obedient, courteous, and considerate driver, then I'm sure that this is a scenario which is just as frustrating to you. And that's where we've got a line of slower moving traffic. And so as a considerate driver, one would naturally just fall in line with the queue of traffic at the back of the queue. But you've always got those who think selfishly and they try and beat the traffic, move to the front of the traffic, and then just before the fork or the exit, then they try and force their way into that line of traffic. But in so doing, actually pose a serious threat or hazard to any vehicles that are traveling in the faster lane. And so we see that in this animation, the driver of the red vehicle slowing down in order to force his way into the slower moving lane of traffic, but posing a danger to faster moving traffic coming up behind it. Real life example, so we have the driver of this red vehicle not wanting to sit in the queue, just as everybody else does, trying to beat the queue, but just before the road then forks a little bit up ahead, tries to force his way into the slower moving lane of traffic. So now he's slowing the camera down, traffic behind the camera maybe is being compounded and piled up because of this inconsiderate driver, and so actually is acting very selfishly in doing that, aside from the fact that it might be and is a very dangerous maneuver, especially if the vehicles are coming up at a much higher speed. And in some scenarios, I know where I am, people do this, and in fact they even come to a full halt in trying to find a gap in the slower moving lane of traffic. And so really dangerous for faster vehicles traveling up ahead. And I'm sure you've got these inconsiderate types, irrespective of where you find yourself in the world. In this video, we have a look at one driver cutting off another driver. Invariably, this happens when both vehicles are traveling in the same direction, and the one vehicle, after passing the adjacent vehicle, would pull into its lane, but not allow enough of a gap in order to pass safely in front of the vehicle that it is passing. And so this would result in either a collision or the driver of the vehicle that is being passed having to slam on brakes in order to allow the vehicle that is passing it enough of a gap in order to move into that lane. So we'll have a look at an animation demonstrating this, and we'll also have a look at a few other animations giving variations on this theme and the reasons why drivers would do this. So in the first animation, just to illustrate the point, the driver of the red vehicle now in the process of passing the driver of the green vehicle, then pulling into the lane of the driver of the green vehicle, but not allowing enough of a gap. And so there's the connection. In this situation, we've got the driver of the red vehicle overtaking the green vehicle, but notice that there's an oncoming vehicle, and so the driver of the red vehicle is now forced to have to cut across the path of the green vehicle, perhaps in a state of panic because of the threat of a head-on collision, so acts wildly, making a rash maneuver, and that could have all sorts of consequences. So when we see a situation like that, and we're going to have a look at a real-life example of it, but you as the driver, you always want to be aware of what is happening behind you. So when you see that there is a driver coming up behind you, overtaking, and now there not being enough of a gap in order for the driver to overtake safely, then you can carry out a number of actions in order to mitigate any sort of danger. Either pull off to the right side of the lane so that you allow more of a gap for the driver to be able to pull into, or to put on brakes enough so that you once again allow a bit of a gap for the driver to pull into. But if you're not aware of any vehicles coming up behind you, then a situation can quickly arise which would be quite dangerous. So in this case, we see that the camera is not aware of what's happening to the rear of him, and so a bit of a situation develops. So you may have noticed that the driver of the black vehicle, in cutting across, actually clipped the front left corner of the camera's vehicle. And so that threw the driver of this black vehicle into a bit of a slide. So he tries to correct, and we see what the result is. Another situation that's very similar. Once again, try and be aware of what's happening behind you, so that if you do have a hasty driver trying to cut into your path, that you can allow enough of a gap. Here, the driver of the pickup truck cuts across, clips once again the front left corner of the vehicle. He's induced into a slide and goes barreling off to the side of the road. In this situation, we're looking at where there's a slight bend in the road. And so if you're traveling adjacent to another vehicle, be careful of that situation, because the driver may not be paying attention to what's happening, thinks that the road continues straight and doesn't take the gentle curve, and so cuts across your path and may sideswipe you. So when we in a situation such as this, always try to hang back from traveling alongside another vehicle. And where I stay, we've got a few roads that have exactly this situation, and the number of times that I not held back, sort of anticipating that the driver alongside me is not going to keep to his lane, I would have had to take my car in for repairs a number of times. So try to be aware of this. See the driver of the rear vehicle just going straight, not taking that gentle curve. So here we have a real life example, a bit of a gentle curve in the road. And so driver coming along the left side here, it's not paying attention, doesn't stick to the curve and just continues straight, cutting a path across the camera's vehicle. So here we have a situation also where the driver is not paying attention, and although there's no bend in the road here, the road continues straight, we still can't assume that when crossing an intersection that a driver is going to stick to his or her lane. And so when going through an intersection, it's always better to not travel alongside another vehicle. Try to rather, if obviously traffic allows it, try to hang a little bit back from the vehicle that is traveling alongside you. Cutting across the path. So here we've got a situation demonstrating that animation. So the driver on the left side not sticking to his lane, cutting across the path of the camera, and there's that contact. So here's a very common scenario. We're traveling down the freeway and we find that we're actually alongside a slower vehicle. And because of that, a vehicle coming up at a higher speed behind the slower vehicle is not wanting to slow down, he's looking for a gap, and so tries to cut out from behind the slower vehicle into the path of the green vehicle. Miscalculates, and there we have that collision. So where we see the situation of a slower vehicle, if you're aware of what's happening in your rear view mirror and you see a faster vehicle coming up behind the slower vehicle, then we know that this faster vehicle is probably going to want to pull out into the lane so that it doesn't have to slow down behind the slower vehicle, and so there's a great chance that it's going to pull across into your lane. Here we've got a slower vehicle, truck. In this case, on the right side here, you'll see there's a vehicle coming up at a higher speed. He's obviously not wanting to be slowed down by the truck, tries to look for a gap in moving across to the left lane, but actually contacts the camera's vehicle. So the camera comes off second best in this situation. So yeah, we've got sort of a similar scenario, but not quite the same. So the faster vehicle approaching a slower vehicle, there is enough of a gap. But what I want to demonstrate in this particular animation is that when you see a vehicle cutting across a lane, never assume that that vehicle is only going to cut across one lane. There's a good possibility when you see a vehicle cutting across a lane that it may continue across multiple lanes, and that's what the point of this animation is. So see if you can spot the danger. Champagne-colored vehicle crossing multiple lanes. Fortunately, no contact in this particular clip, but we always want to be aware of that. So just to repeat, whenever you see a vehicle cutting across a lane, never assume that it's just going to cut across one lane. And very often it is the case that the vehicles cut across multiple lanes. So here we've got a situation where we've got a truck, it could be a bus, but a larger vehicle, now taking a curve, and the driver of the green vehicle finding him or herself on the outer lane of that curve. So this is more of a dangerous situation because especially where it's a truck or a bus, which is more elevated, when we're on the outer edge of that bend, so in the outer lane relative to the truck or the bus, we tend to be more in the blind spot of that vehicle. And also there's the danger that if it's a tighter curve, that a truck or a bus that might have greater momentum is not able to take that curve as easily and overshoots the curve going into the outer lane. And so we always want to be careful of being in the outer lane of a bus or a truck, a larger vehicle, when traveling along a curve or a bend in the road. So this animation demonstrates the truck going across the curve, and here we see a real life example, cutting across the lane. The driver's more in the blind spot of the truck, and he's now in a situation because where you've got a longer vehicle, now it's more difficult to be able to escape from that situation. The truck is moving fairly quickly across the lane, and so the driver doesn't have the time to accelerate to shoot ahead of the truck. And because of the length of the truck, if the driver, the camera, tries to slow down, there's still the chance that the trailer of the truck is going to cut across and make contact with the camera's vehicle. So fortunately, in this case, the truck driver realized what was happening and moved back to his lane again. So in this real life example, we don't have a curve, we've got a straight road, but that doesn't mean there's no danger, because what happens is that when you coming up at more of a speed relative to the truck and you're going to be now passing the truck, your view is limited of what's happening this side of the road. So what's happening on the shoulder of the road. So in this particular clip, we'll see that the truck comes across some vehicles that are parked on the shoulder and now swerves to avoid them and cuts across the path of this vehicle into this vehicle's lane. So there we see the drivers had to slam on brakes. But a bit of a dangerous situation because the driver of this vehicle couldn't see what was happening in the road ahead on the side. And so where there were obstacles, the truck had to swerve to avoid the obstacles. This driver was totally unaware of that. So there are the vehicles on the road. Let's just go back a moment. And notice this vehicle not even pulled way over onto the shoulder. The back left corner of the van is sticking way out into the road. And so no wonder the driver of the truck had to swerve to avoid them. Aside from that, these people are standing in a very dangerous position here. And so you can imagine, had the truck not swerved, what could have resulted. So in this situation, once again, we have an intersection, but notice that there are no clear road markings on the other side of the intersection. So in a situation like this, especially, we want to be careful to not travel alongside any adjacent vehicles. So in the previous animation, there were road markings, but even in that situation, we don't want to travel alongside the adjacent vehicle. We always want to try and hold back and never be overlapped with the vehicle alongside us. That's provided the traffic allows for that, but where it does, then it allows for a gap in case the driver of the adjacent vehicle doesn't stick to his or her lane. Real life example of this. So in the intersection here, there are no clear road markings. So the driver of this vehicle, the silver vehicle, cuts across the path of this pickup truck. please like, subscribe, and get notified.